Well, I think it is time that we begin the seminar conference gathering of today. It is our pleasure and our honor to host here at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona this occasion to discuss again on the concept of intersectionality. This occasion is part of informing project that we have here at the Facultat de Filosofia i Lletres at the UAB concerning the training in gender. And the project is called Projecte, Menció, Encarna, Sanahuja. And we hosted in the frame within this project, we hosted another conference on intersectionality on March 10th this year called Updating Intersectionality. And this encounter today, entitled Intersecting Intersectionality, has the purpose of continuing thinking of intersectionality as a critical tool for feminisms in the present and in the future, taking into account new understandings and new conceptualizations and new contextualizations of the main axis of inequality concerned in intersectionality, at least the classical ones: race, gender, and class. And to that, with that goal, is it that we have organized today this conference, this mini conference, Intersecting Intersectionality. We will begin with the keynote by Professor Avtar Brah, and then afterwards we will have the occasion to listen to Karo Moret and Montse Rifà in the program. We had also Miriam Hatibi, but unfortunately Miriam told us yesterday that she was not feeling well. She was sick and she could not be able to join us today. So we wish her that she gets well very soon, and we hope for future occasions for discussion. So let me briefly introduce Professor Avtar Brah. Professor Brah is a Ugandan-British sociologist. She's an emeritus professor of sociology at Birkbeck, University of London, and a pioneer of diaspora studies. Since the 1960s, she has participated in various Black feminist collectives and in a number of editorial and political projects. Her works explore, hand in hand with her militant experience, the intersectionality of gender, race, ethnicity, class, age, and nationalism in the composition of identities and political practices that can only be understood in a multi-axial framework of power. Her academic career is broadly rich. Avtar Brah was a research associate at Leicester University from 1980 to 1982 and a lecturer at the Open University from 1982 to 1985. She joined Birkbeck in 1985 as a lecturer, eventually rising to the rank of professor there. She was also visiting professor at the University of California in 1992 and Cornell University in 2001. Her most recent book to be published, Decolonial Imaginings, Intersectional Conversations and Contestations, is going to be presented. We're going to have the privilege to have it presented today by Avtar Brah. So this is very, very good for us, very nice. So we are thankful for that. And other works of her are Cartographies of Diaspora, Contesting Identities from 1996, Global Futures, Migration, Environment and Globalization from 1999, and Hybridity and its Discontents, Politics, Science and Culture from 2000. Well, it is again our pleasure and honor to have Avtar Brah today to hold the keynote for this mini conference, and we welcome her very much. The floor is yours, Avtar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begonia. I'm delighted to be here. It's really a pleasure to be invited to your gathering, and I'm really, really happy to be here. Well, the title of my presentation, as you know, is Decolonial Imaginings, Intersectional Conversations and Contestations. In that context, I begin with a question in relation to the term decolonial in my title. So I'm going to talk about decolonial for a little while before I go to intersectionality. Yeah? In other words, how do we address the present day, and I emphasize the present day, consequences of histories and processes of colonization and decolonization? In its commonly accepted meaning, decolonization refers to processes, events, incidents, and histories of political challenge and struggles of resistance that led to the formal independence of former colonies from the colonizers so as to establish self-governing new sovereign states. However, as is well known, formal political independence did not always lead to socioeconomic, cultural, or psychological independence. As Linda Tuifai Smith argues, decolonization is not simply a formal process of handing over the instruments of government, but rather it is a long-term divesting of colonial power. In fact, the challenge is to effect a simultaneous decolonizing of the mind in both the colonizer and the colonized, in pursuit of egalitarian relationships of equality and justice. Although formal colonial arrangements may be over in great many instances, colonialism still lives in the world through power relations that interconnect the life worlds of the dominant and the dominated peoples. The post-colonial worlds we live in today are deeply marked by the histories that produce them. Coloniality, as Walter Mignolio argues, is constitutive of modernity. The term decolonization was transformed into decoloniality due in part to foreground decolonization of knowledge and to critique, challenge, and dismantle colonial epistemic hierarchies. The aim instead is to install knowledge regimes which treat the political and cultural practices of the subaltern as equal to those of the dominant group and lead to epistemic reconstitution, as Mignolo describes it. The point is that an effective political strategy would require the development of decolonial epistemic as well as socioeconomic, cultural, and political agendas and practices. In terms of praxis, decoloniality stakes a claim to contributing to scholarly activism, to political work of building new optimistic futures committed to life-affirming practices. Decoloniality embraces pluriversality. It offers a counter-narrative to neoliberal and imperialist projects. Decoloniality seeks to validate the lived experience and cultures of subordinate groups, of those suffering exploitation and discrimination. It seeks to dismantle intersectional hierarchies of vectors such as race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability. Decolonial solidarity agendas are designed to be thoroughly multidimensional and intersectional. In other words, decoloniality and intersectionality are inherently enmeshed. They work together. At the present time, the term intersectionality has been widely taken up by scholars, policy advocates, practitioners in a variety of fields, and political activists in both formal arenas and at grassroots level. Within the academy, intersectionality is part of interdisciplinary fields ranging from women's studies, gender studies, and race and ethnic studies, through media studies, cultural studies, and area studies, to disciplines such as sociology, politics, and history. At the same time, the concept and practice of intersectionality is part of global public discussions. Protagonists range from human rights activists, government officials, teachers, social workers, youth workers, and academics. Hence, there's a tremendous heterogeneity in the meanings actually, not meaning, meanings associated with the term. However, as Patricia Hill Collins and Surma Bilge provide a useful definition that could be seen to have wider applicability. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this definition, but I thought it would be useful to remind us of it. And I quote, intersectionality is a way of understanding and analyzing the complexity in the world, in people and in human experiences, the events and conditions of social and political life, and the self can seldom be understood as shaped by one factor. They are generally shaped by many factors in diverse and mutually influencing ways. When it comes to social inequality, people's lives and the organizations of power in a given society are better understood as being shaped not by a single axis of social division, be it race, gender, or class, but by many axes that work together and influence each other. Intersectionality as an analytic tool gives people better access to the complexity of the world and of themselves. End of quote. Questions of power are crucial in addressing intersectionality as an analytical tool. Collins and Bilge identify 6 core ideas of intersectional frameworks, namely inequality, relationality, power, social context, complexity, and social justice. I offer a few points in relation to each of these vectors. Firstly, many current definitions of intersectionality single out social equality as an important dimension of social relations. To use the concept of intersectionality when analyzing inequality emphasizes additional layers of complexity because social inequality is hardly ever caused by a single factor, as we've already said. Intersectionality foregrounds a view of social inequality based on intersections among different factors and categories. Secondly, in relation to power, it is important to note that intersectional power is understood as mutually constitutive of the interactions between different axes of differentiation. So it's a multidimensional differentiation. That is to say that our lives are shaped by many factors in varying and variable, mutually influencing ways. Different dimensions such as race, gender, and sexuality constitute interlocking or intersecting systems of power. In my own work, I've called this modality of power as multi-axial formation of power. This formation brings together specific but overlapping domains, including structural, cultural, political, disciplinary, and interpersonal. Third, relationality is a central aspect of relationships between and across different social differentiations and divisions. Relationality interrogates binary thinking coded in couplets such as either or, and instead emphasizes interconnection and multiplicity. We use terms such as conversation, coalition, transaction, dialogue, and interaction in putting across different inflections that the meaning of relationality contains within itself. Fourth, it is important to emphasize that sort of social context is crucial in understanding how we may contextualize and situate the interrelationality of different axes of differentiation. For instance, historical, political, or intellectual contexts shape our ways of thinking and doing. Attention to social context is at the heart of producing nuanced analysis and developing affirmative practice. Fifth, in terms of complexity, the core themes noted above, such as social inequality, social context, power, and relationality, interlace and intertwine, thereby making for complexity within intersectional worlds. As is often stressed, intersectionality is a tool for understanding such complexity. But this raises the critical question of how to theorize the point of intersection or intertwining. I think this is a very, very important point, and I shall return to this issue later. Finally, questions of social justice are often inherent to projects of intersectionality, especially in the context of core themes of inequality, the dynamics of power, and relationality. As a form of critical activism and practice, intersectionality is critically highly relevant, not least because one of its key aims is to challenge power relations. In thinking about the genealogy of the concept of intersectionality, it is important, in my view, to make a distinction between intersectional work and the naming of this work as intersectionality. In other words, intersectional work has been going on for a much longer period than the late 1980s and the early 1990s, when the word intersectionality gained ascendancy. The term itself is assumed as having been constructed by Kimberly Crenshaw, but as Collins and Bill suggest, its origins are multiple and better understood as embedded within long-standing movements of Black women and other women of color. I myself was influenced by the Sojourner Truth's 1840 speech, Ain't I a Woman, which most of us know about, and the Combahee River Collective statement of 1977, which is also extremely well known, which spoke of, quote, the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking, end of quote, and importantly, as I argued earlier, presented its analysis in the context of decolonization, desegregation, class relations, and feminism. I, in my work, too, emphasized the importance of analyzing intersections between vectors such as class, race, and gender in my book, Cartographies of Diaspora, published in 1996, when I was not immersed in the academic discourse of intersectionality. Mine was an optic informed by a sociological imagination, nurtured by post-colonial and post-structuralist theoretical and political perspectives. It posits a framework to address questions of diaspora, and inter alia develops the concept of diaspora space, which is intersected within a conceptual grid of diaspora, border, and multi-axial politics of location. I argued that, and I quote, diaspora space in the intersectionality of diaspora, so I used the term intersectionality at that time, border and location dislocation as a point of confluence of economic, political, cultural, and psychic processes. In other words, I use the term intersectionality, but from a somewhat different vantage point in that it did not emerge from Crenshaw's conceptual apparatus. Because of my focus on diaspora, it has an inbuilt global dimension. It has been my claim for a while that diasporas are inherently intersectional. Diaspora as an imperial trajectory is not a homogeneous category. Rather, diasporas are differentiated according to factors such as gender, race, class, and we may mention ethnicity, ability, and sexuality. The concept of diaspora centers on the configurations of power which underline, mark, and differentiate diasporas internally, that's important, but also situating them in relation to one another. To the extent the concept of diaspora is a genealogical one, it signals the historical variable analysis of economic, political, cultural forms of relationality. That is to say that this genealogical analysis is intersectional and one marked by a multi-axial performative concept of power. In 2004, Anne Phoenix and I wrote about the discourses of intersectionality, and we started with 19th century debates that foreground what today goes by the name of intersectionality. We started the article with the well-known 19th century elocution, "Ain't I a woman?" articulated by Sojourner Truth, a woman freed from slavery. Her speech places questions of intersectionality into stark relief. We define the concept of intersectionality as, quote, signifying the complex, irreducible, varied, and variable effects which ensue when multiple axes of differentiation, economic, political, cultural, psychic, subjective, and experiential, intersect in historically specific contexts. This formulation challenges additive models of discussions on the subject. Floya Anthias, in her publication of 2021, makes an important intervention in the theorization of intersectionality. There is an ongoing debate, which is far from settled, as to whether intersectionality is a metaphor, a heuristic device, or a theoretical paradigm. Anthias favors the idea that it's a heuristic device, especially as this highlights the idea of or points to the formation of concepts in process rather than as pre-given. It treats difference and power in multi-layered forms. In terms of the object of an intersectional analysis, three different levels of singling out difference are identified. The level of social ontologies of difference, the level of different categories of difference, and the level of concrete relations of difference. Importantly, the concept of class and stratification are analyzed in and through intersectionality. I think this is particularly important in sociology. In other words, class is located within an understanding of inequality and stratification from the vantage point of a translocational lens. Though class identifies inequality, inequality itself cannot be reduced to a problem of class alone. Floya Anthias also urges us to rethink a theory of stratification away from the binary representing production of relations as material and ethnicity or gender as solely symbolic or cultural. This is an important point, I think. Moreover, as she argues, capitalisms are not abstract. Rather, they are violent and subordinating and built on the exploitation not only of the abstract worker, but the differential exploitation of differently marked bodies. In similar vein, Patricia Hill Collins suggests that, quote, and this is her 2019 publication, the quote, intersectionality is well on its way to becoming a critical social theory that can address contemporary social problems and the social changes needed to solve them. So at the moment, the debate is whether or not intersectionality is a social theory or whether it's a heuristic divide. That's where the debate has reached. I now turn to some critiques of intersectionality. Despite its popularity, intersectionality has not been without its critics. One criticism has been whether the metaphor of intersection with this image of road crossing is adequate for the critical task of analyzing power differentials normativities, and identity formations across multiple fields such as gender, class, and race. But such a complex task can be performed through using the metaphor of intersection. The term configuration instead of intersection has been suggested by some people, though in my view, how far this is a better concept than intersection is debatable. The second reservation has been whether or not there's a need for a specific theory and methodology of intersectionality, and that's still being debated. As we know, it's quite well known, as far back as 2005, Leslie McCall developed a threefold clustering of approaches to the study of intersectionality. She labeled them as the intercategorical complexity, intracategorical complexity, and anti-categorical complexity. Intercategorical approach presumes the existence of intersections and then attempts to map the relationship between different social groups and how these are changing. The intra-categorical approach is live to the shortcomings of existing categorizations and interrogates the ways in which they mark boundaries of distinction. The anti-categorical approach, on the other hand, is concerned with a critique of the presumption that categories are a pre-given. Rather, it deconstructs the categories, paying attention to the regimes of power in and through which the categories are constituted in the first place. Here, social categories are seen historically, culturally, and linguistically produced. I'm sympathetic and partial to the anti-categorical approach. This is not to suggest that categories themselves are meaningless. Far from it. Rather, they are not already existing formations, but take form through sociocultural, economic, and psychic processes. Woman, for instance, is not a pre-constituted category, but one which takes meaning in varying and variable forms within discourse and sociopolitical, economic, and cultural processes. This broad categorization by McCall is helpful, but does not provide, I don't think, a discrete methodology. But my argument is that in any case, there cannot be a single methodology which all intersectional analysts may follow. Intersectionality is first and foremost an interdisciplinary endeavor. I think most of us agree on that. Different subject disciplines have different methodologies. That which we choose is dependent on our own disciplinary background and the nature of the problems we are trying to analyze. It cannot, by definition, have a single overarching set of methods as tool of analysis. Some analysts working with this concept locate their work within feminist standpoint theory. Standpoint feminism argues that feminist social science foregrounds the standpoint of women who are assumed to better able to understand certain features of the world and who hold a different type of knowledge from, say, men. This perspective, as we know, has been characterized as being essentialist and in some measure contrary to the demands of intersectionality, insofar as women, or indeed any person, are not simply their gender. In a much more nuanced perspective, which does not fix knowledge construction along a single axis, Donna Haraway has used the notion of situated knowledge, which is produced, circulated, and challenged via intersectional articulations. In similar vein, there has been lively debate about the concept of experience. I mean, obviously, we have to think about experience if we're talking about intersectionality. Scholars such as Joan W. Scott have argued for a non-essentialist or structuralist mode of theorizing experience. The point is that experience does not transparently reflect reality, but is implicated in the constitution of what we call reality. Experience is a process of signification, a practice of making sense symbolically and narrative. It is about our struggles over material conditions and meaning. Experience does not happen to an already constituted experiencing subject, but rather it is the site of subject formation. The processes of embodiment, including the workings of the psyche, are complex, for we are much more than an amalgam of subject positions. We need also to take account of emotions, yearnings, and unruly and precarious working of the psychic. So it is the bringing together of the social and the psychic and the emotions, which is really what intersectionality demands of us. Our perspectives, informed by standpoint theory and those others which take inspiration from post-structuralist theoretical formulations, mutually exclusive. Despite their major differences, it has been argued that there is some overlap and that intersectionality offers the opportunity to reconcile these two perspectives, insofar as both decenter the collective subject woman or any other non-binary conception of gender identity. Both require us to integrate marginalized life experiences as well as highlight the importance of understanding power in its multiple manifestations. Through the lens of intersectionality, both perspectives caution against reciting the race, class, gender mantra without due attention to the processes associated with the constitution of each decentered positioning. So what are the prospects for the future of intersectionality? Neera Yuval Davis, for instance, sees the concept to hold a great deal of potential. According to her, intersectionality is far better equipped to do justice to the analysis of complex relations of inequality than stratification theory in sociology. Kathy Davis has argued that paradoxically, the very vagueness and open-ended of its framework is the secret of its success, and this portends well for its future. One of its strengths lies in the way in which it demands of those engaged in theoretical work to append their meta-narratives in the concrete social and political context, while at the same time asking generalist researchers to appreciate the importance of theory in feminist inquiry. Nina Likhe provides a qualified assessment of intersectionality. She conceptualizes it as a nodal point and favors it only so long as it remains, quote, open-ended framework for comparing different feminist conceptualizations of intersecting power differentials, normativities, and identity formations. A discursive site where different feminist positions are in critical dialogue or productive conflict with one another. So critical dialogue is very important to many of these definitions. Jasbir Puar has used the concept of intersectionality for many years and still values its analytical reach. But she has moved from its general deployment in favor of the concept of assemblage. She argues that, and I quote, as opposed to an intersectional model of identity, which presumes that components, race, class, gender, sexuality, nation, age, religion, are separable analytics and can thus be disassembled. An assemblage is more tuned to interwoven forces that merge and dissipate time, space, and body against linearity, coherence, and permanency. However, in my view, sociologically speaking at least, these components are designed to be separate as analytical tools, but are presumed to enmesh in terms of embodiment. So the distinction is between analytical tools and embodiment. Thus, the distinction is between an analytical concept and the empirical processes of embodiment. This, I think, is important to hold on to. Poir is also critical of the multiplicity of uses to which the concept of intersectionality has been put by different sets of users, especially of its take-up as a, quote, tool of diversity management and a mantra of liberal multiculturalism, end of quote, and argues that, quote, colludes with the disciplinary apparatus of the state, census, demography, racial profiling, surveillance, end of quote. I agree that we should definitely be critical of this and stand in opposition to its negative uses in such practices as surveillance and racial profiling. But on the whole, I view intersectionality and assemblage as complementary rather than as mutually exclusive analytics. There are those who argue that debates on intersectionality may fail to take on board issues of colonialism, imperialism, and post-colonialism. This is a very, very important criticism with which I agree. It doesn't often happen this way. I personally emphasize the historically specific dimension of intersectionality. And this historical specificity foregrounds histories of coloniality, imperialism, and post-coloniality. A related criticism with considerable merit is that intersectional studies may not always attend to transnational and global concerns. In my own work on diaspora, questions of transnationalism become central. The discourse of intersectionality has also been critiqued for paying insufficient attention to social relations of capitalism. Again, in my own thinking, class and questions of capitalism are central to intersectional analysis. To conclude, overall, these criticisms are important, but can be attended to so that intersectionality retains its significance and import as an analytical and critical tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avtar. Wow, you've given us a very, indeed, rich reflection about intersectionality in the context of the conference today, and you have really touched many of the points that were the point in our gathering today. I would love to just hear some questions. If any of the attendants have any questions, please just switch on your camera and your phone if you're willing to that, and address whatever comment, question might have to Avtar Brah. We welcome also, by the way, Karo Moret, who joined us from the other side of the earth in the middle of her night, very generously. So thank you, Karo, and welcome to our meeting here today. Well, if you still have something to think about, then I dare to begin asking some questions, Avtar, if it is okay with you.
Yes.
As I said, I found your presentation very rich, and I have at least 5 questions, but I might not address them all. Let's see.
Yes.
The first thing I wanted to address is regarding complexity, and regarding the multi-dimensional or multi-axial formation of power that you've been describing,
Yes.
that intersectionality should address or addresses somehow. I wanted to ask, I mean, right now I'm working on violence, specifically against women, but this again, I mean, sexual violence or is it also a very broad context concept, not only, I mean, also partially because of what you say, woman is not a preconstituted category.
Yes.
So violence against women, what does it mean that, what do we mean with that now, today? How can we make that concept operative, no? But the question is, to what extent can intersectionality be useful and effective as a tool for analysis, but also for social transformation regarding violence, which is so closely related to power, because I understand that violence is also multidimensional and multi-axial. So this would be my first question.
Well, I mean, in a sense, you are kind of answering it as you go along, because you're absolutely right. I mean, power has many dimensions, and those dimensions take concrete kind of appearance in different research projects. And in your project on violence, obviously, we think about power in terms of both its embodiment in the person of the individual, but also institutions that impact upon the problematic itself. So we're talking about multi-dimensions in terms of all the various factors that come into play, both the psychic, the social, the personal, interpersonal, empirical, and structural. They all come into play in the embodiment. I think embodiment is a key construct here, because what do we mean by embodiment? You know, in a sense, how do we experience? That's why I talked about the concept of experience as well. How do we experience all these different factors, you know? And experience itself is constitutive of ourselves, you know? So I that's how I would kind of look at that.
Okay, then I have another, thank you. I have another question. Precisely regarding this aspect of materiality of the concept of intersectionality, given precisely by this this key aspect of experience, and of embodiment. I mean, one of the points of the conference today was precisely to discuss this embodiment of race, gender, and class, which is not homogeneous. It is also very complex in itself, and how this heterogeneity affects the intersectional working with intersectionality, and thus the operativity of the tool as an analytical and critical tool. And in that context, you mentioned Nina Lüke, and her Northern European reflection and work on that. And my question was thinking of this, like you said, genealogy of intersectionality. How does living, I mean, I don't want to sound wrong, but in the northern countries, of course, the experience is, I would say, maybe less complex than in other contexts. I can imagine, I don't know, India, the United States. I mean, the northern countries are still rather white worlds, as it were. No? So I wanted to know if you have any ideas about this differentiation, this material differentiation of the intersectional work itself, taking into account that the experience in the northern European countries is not the same as the experience in India or in the United States or
southern states.
So I don't know what you thought about about that.
I think that in each given context, we have to look at the factors that come into play. You're right, the northern countries, if by north you mean northern Europe, or did you mean the whole of Europe? Or
No,
southern?
no.
Do you differentiate the Southern Europe from Northern Europe?
Yes,
Yes,
indeed.
it's a different experience, isn't it? So the experiences are different, and we have to really work closely with those differences so that we don't kind of present as if all these kind of issues and concerns have a single kind of operation. The operations are very complex and very different. And I think as analysts and political people, what we can do is to look at what those differences are, how they come together, how they impact on bodies, and how they actually um, mark the experience of everyday life that differently marked bodies come into contact with. So I think I agree that we cannot really use one kind of uh, a way of looking at it as if it can stand for the whole world. It cannot. Everything has to be looked at in its specificity. And I think specificity is a key concept here. What is the specificity of each context? So that's what I would underline. Specificity of each context is very, very central, I think.
So complexity would play along with specificity.
Absolutely, because specificity actually makes us tune into complexity, because specificity brings in to play things such as race, culture, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. Even at the level of specificity, those actually play together. And therefore, there is not a contradiction between complexity and specificity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then let me just ask one last thing before Montse Rifà ask a question, because she's raising her hand. Regarding the possible critiques of intersectionality. I recently heard a talk by Chiara Bottici, who's working at the New School of Social Research. She's also been working with body and intersectionality and power.
Yes.
And she began this talk making a kind of critique. I would like to know what you think about that and what we can do about it. No, she said, I will put it very, very schematically. The idea was that, I mean, how long can be the list of axes of inequality or differentiation? I mean, we begin with race, and then gender, and then class, and then ability, and then sexual practices, and then we go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Does this not diminish
Dissipate
the critical, exactly, the critical potential of intersectionality?
Well, I don't agree with that, because my feeling is that you don't include everything in every instance, in every context. That's why I underline context, because in a given context, different kinds of axes come into play, and different types of configurations of those intersections come into play. So they are not all working together in every context, in every kind of way. And therefore, I think we must look at specific situations and see which particular factors. So for instance, age is not relevant in every single context, but in particular context is very, very central. You know, things such as gender is more central in many, many contexts. But I think it's very important that we recognize that differences and coming together of these differences is very important. But it does not, to look at different axes that we don't sort of include all kinds of axes willy-nilly. We include them in the context of what are our research questions. Do the axes we focus on, do they illuminate it, the research questions we are addressing, we're working towards? So I think our research questions, our context is what we need to focus on, rather than just kind of listing these various different axes.
So actually, before we were saying, okay, complexity plays along with specificity.
Yeah.
Now we can say that intersectionality plays along with situated knowledge.
Situated knowledge, yes, yes,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Montse, you have a question too. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much, Avtar Brah, for this lecture. I enjoyed a lot the book Cartographies of the Diaspora in the Spanish version, and I'm ready to read the new book. And I would like to ask you about the connections between your positions and Gayatri's Spivak positions. Positions, you know.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I would like
my
to know
position and
Gayatri's feedback.
oh, Gayatri's feedback.
Okay. Because, for instance, specificity is one of the connections, but I would like to know more about this, about your point of view in a dialogue with Gayatri's theories and perspectives.
Well, I'm actually a little bit out of touch with Gayatri's more recent thinking on this. You might want to tell me a little bit about what particular aspects make you think about that. Is it the questions of
yeah, maybe I think that one of the differences between both is that you came from completely different
absolutely
disciplinary fields.
Literary scholar she is, yes, and I'm a sociologist, yeah. So we have different approaches to that, obviously, and but on the other hand, you know, I learn a lot from literary studies, and I'm sure literary studies colleagues learn from sociology. With sociology, you have to look at a particular problematic that faces you in the concrete situation, and then you try to analyze that. Whereas, so the text is the social world. For us, for sociologists, social world is the text. Whereas for literary scholars, they actually have texts that they analyze. Obviously, they can have access to the social world through the text as well, but there's a difference in which our text and their text is slightly different, even though they intersect. I don't think that doesn't answer your question, does it?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
It was a very clear image you gave after. It was very clear, yes. Well, Jana has also a question.
Okay. Hello, Avtar. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. My question is in relation to decoloniality as an heuristic device.
Yeah.
And specifically regarding what you talked about, like knowledge regimes and epistemic reconstitution.
Yeah.
So in the critiques, you mentioned that there is one of the views that was regarding categories and the importance of categories in this whole epistemic or knowledge dimension.
Yeah.
And you stressed that categories are historically constructed,
yes.
Which this does not mean that they don't have value or that they can be modulated through opinions, but that they are produced by power relations.
Yeah.
So my question is, when we work with intersectionality and with categories, To what extent shall we apply, like, shall we deconstruct these categories in order to conceive them as open categories and not closed? Because sometimes when we talk about intersectionality, I feel like we display the categories like fighting for which one is more important in the specific context.
Yeah.
And one of the responses to this might be like, okay, maybe we should deconstruct them and think them in another way. But at the same time, the historical weight of each category might be more important and maybe might make impossible to deconstruct everything.
Yeah.
So what's your point of view on this? How should we work with concepts and with categories in intersectionality to, like, acknowledge all the historical weight that they have?
I'm not sure if I can answer your question or whether I fully understand what you're asking, but I mean, generally speaking, in sociology, for instance, and this is true for class, is often considered as having more weight than some of the other categories in sociology, for instance, and we've had to struggle to make gender and race as important dimensions to address in relation to that. So we have to actually think through. I can't get away from the fact that I don't think that in every context you can assume that the same categories have valence. I think the context is very specific, although questions such as class and gender and race, from my perspective, are very, very crucial in most contexts to think through. Because if you think about race, people think, oh, well, race, if I don't have actually black people or brown people in my country, that doesn't mean race is not important. But that's not true. Race is actually a dimension that has underpinned the constitution of Europe as Europe. And therefore, you look at a very complex way, and where, in fact, tools from sociology, not sociology, tools from literature and philosophy, etc., can help us in those contexts a lot more than maybe sociology. But I think that we need to be thinking through that way and looking and assuming that we have to work enormously hard to sort of what's the word I'm looking for, to kind of unravel the complex interconnections. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, though. Do come back to me if you want to.
Yes, you answered my question fully, because I think what you said, that it doesn't have to be present as in material bodies in order to be present at the analysis is very important. Yeah, because then it shows like the structural dimension of these categories.
Yeah,
because yeah, so yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
But it's interesting, no? Because then you are actually pointing at two levels of complexity here.
Yeah.
The one is the structural level, no? You don't need to have black people. We were talking about before about the north of Europe, no?
Yeah.
It is a white society, as it were, but it does not mean that race is not a relevant topic to take into account when analyzing power relationship and power inequality and et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting that there's kind of two surfaces at once playing to one another, no?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if anyone said something on the chat. Okay. Yes, we will answer this later. And I don't know if there's any other questions, if the people attending. No? Okay, then Avtar, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure. As I said, I have other questions, but I might send them to you.
Okay, certainly. Certainly. Will be a pleasure.
Really, thank you very much, and we will be looking forward to the publication of your book to continue reading you. And
yes, thank you.
Thank you for your generosity and your kindness.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we can go on if you are ready for that. At the moment, we would welcome Karo Moret. We asked Karo to engage with one of these axes or vectors of differentiation or inequality, which is the axe of race. Without any doubt, constructed acts of differentiation, very operative in the north of Europe too. Karo Moret was working at the Department of the Humanities at the Pompeu Fabra University of Barcelona. But now she's working ahead on her research from the point of view of the African legacy and the diasporas in the Caribbean, in order to evaluate the influence of the African culture and legacy on Western knowledge. But she's now working at, I don't remember the name of your university, Karo?
Yes, I'm working actually 2 years. I've been working here in Australia.
In Australia?
Australian National University in Canberra.
Okay.
And yes, now I'm living in Australia.
You're living in Australia. Is that I know, but I didn't remember the name of the university explicitly. So the floor is yours. We are very much looking forward to listening to you, Karo. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
No, it's a pleasure. Oh my God, I'm such a fan of the work of Avtar Brah. So it was a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your talk. Of course, we all learn so much about your work, and part of your work help us. I'm a migrant, so part of your work helped me to understand my situation and what I wanted to research and work about in the future. So really, really thank you. I'm very excited, but I'm going to try to concentrate on what I have to say. Part of the things that we were talking today, they are actually part of my talk too. So I'm going to make a continuum about that. We were talking about the axis of intersectionality, and especially about race and gender, which is for me are the basic, because of my situation, because of my experience, all those concepts that Professor Avtar Brah have been talking today. I completely agree that we don't need to include all the time, all the access. I think that we need to be able to embrace the complexity and accommodate the access that we need in order to be more specific, in order to answer the question we are looking for, the answer that we are looking for. We have to be able to build this, and we need to accommodate what we need for our research. I think it's very complicated, and it's almost impossible to address to all the access all the time for every subject. We cannot do that. I think that is just heroicus goal and almost impossible, actually. So of course it depends on the context and depend of the situation and all those. You were talking about this intersectionality genealogy, and of course we need to address to that. We need to incorporate that, but again, we need to make a selection, and that is why we need to. And sometimes it's not fair, and sometimes, you know, we receive some criticism because we select one point of view or another one axis on another one. And in my case, for my research, that's basically on race, gender, and religion, of course I put all these in the first. These are my first categories in order of my research. Also ethnicity, and living and working 25 years in Spain, I have to, because before Begoña, you were telling that Europe was a white society. I don't think so. I think Europe was never white. Europe was built to be white or for whites, but Europe was never white. Europe was built in this regime of create this differentiation of races and ethnicities in order to give this majority, if we want to tell, or this interest in this majority of white population. But of course, we have layers of class and caste and whatever. We have it in you. And I didn't realize that, of course, when I arrived to Europe. So it's not only that I spent 25 years, it's also that I have to incorporate myself to the European society. So I studied there, I worked there. I was illegal there because when I arrived, of course, I spent all these legal process. So in order of intersectionality, I think that in the case, specifically in Spain and in Europe in general, I think it's very important to incorporate the ethnicity in the equation. That is something that, you know, when we talk about intersectionality in Europe, especially in Spain, there is nothing, maybe more in British studies, that is something that is there, and there is a lot of academic like Avtar Brah and the way, I don't know, Stuart Hall, for example, they talk a lot about ethnicity and of course this kind of diasporic identity is created, but still in a Spanish academia, we haven't incorporated that when we talk about intersectionalities. We haven't incorporated how important it is. And I'm talking about that because the most of the time, in the case of Spain, we put gender as the first line, right? We situate the intersectional studies around gender almost exclusively. It's very complicated to find works connecting with migration at the same time that gender connected with race, of course. And I think that Spain is forgetting not only the root, but also the context. It seems that it's not important. And that is been my claiming all over these years. That is, in our academia, we need to incorporate these other women and their situation and their context. And migrant women are erased from our research as social scientists in the case of Spain. And that is something that today we cannot let that happen. Of course, our experiences are different, and of course, our bodies also are different, and we need, in this case, to incorporate, of course, race. But the thing is that even if we take out of the equation migration, and if we take out of the equation ethnicity in this case, sometimes, and the most of the time, I think, in the case of Spain, they forget other communities that live in Spain, that are part of the Spain. For example, the Gypsy communities. They are not included in our researches. Yes. So Spain don't need to address, not even to the migrants like me, or to study as people from the periphery. Spain has their own communities, other communities that have been segregated for our study and for our point of view, even from the way Spain have developed as a society. And we still can feel and we still can live that segregation in a Spanish society. So we don't need to go very far to find this. So my claiming is not only to start to incorporate this complexity around Spanish studies and Spanish communities, but also to incorporate other migrant communities to this equation. And I think that is because of the way the Spanish society has been dealing with these other communities inside Spain. I think we also even can share our categories as like race and ethnicity and migration with these communities. So I think that we could share this point of view about intersectionalities. My other point is yes, it's about the way especially Black communities in Europe, Black people in Europe, born in Europe, address to themselves. Yeah, and this is a thing that I've been working a little bit for a few years now, because it's a little bit worried about this new concept, more or less new, about the Afro-European address themselves, how they want to be defined. This I think that Gilroy talked a little bit about this dialectic and these tensions. Also, Stuart Hall and of course Professor Avtar. They work a lot about these tensions between identities. Of course, it's complicated. Of every one of us that have been migrant and have been foreigner in any other country, we can be able to talk about these tensions, the way you are or the way your parent has been, the experience they have, and the new society when you arrive that you have to deal, that, there is a lot of tensions there. But the thing is that how these new Afro-European define themselves and how they want to be situated, because they are part of the society, of course, but in the way they want to be connected with the society that they are, because they are part of this European society. The thing is that they usually forget the migration issue. Maybe they are not part of the trip. Maybe they are not part of that travel migration. But the thing is that maybe their parents were the one that embody that travel or that trip from their countries. But the thing is that this new subject, the Afro-European subject, or they forget to address in this new consideration, this new concept, how they establish in this society. They are forgetting to address to that trouble. I mean, to this how to say, how they need to establish, how they are family, they are parents, they are unestablished in this new society. So they are only addressing, and there is something that it worried me a lot, they only started to address about their actual situation in Europe. So these controversies is more about racial tensions with the society. Of course, they have the most of them, but if they don't necessarily have any legal problem with the society, if they have the European passport, they forget to connect with that other part. And that, the case of Spain, and I don't know if in Britain is the same, but in the case of Spain, this is making a huge bridge between the migrant community and the people born in Spain. And that is something that has been calling my attention, because the claims that Afro-Spanish, they are calling today, the things that they are interested in this cause, they have nothing to do with migration. They are more connected. They are only claiming for the way Spanish societies are treating them, the way that the Spanish society don't want to recognize as a Spanish because they have a different color, because they have a different ethnicity, and they completely forget about the trip, about the migration, about the legal problem that till today migrant people that arrive, these subjects that are arriving have with the society. So this is from no far away, but this is still creating a very clear and very sad fracture between the two communities, and sometimes in the same family. I think that, of course, I should say that for me, the principal categories that I address in order to talk about intersectionality is race and gender. I'm not trying to understand that, but it still is very important, the diasporic studies. That is very important in the case of Europe, and that is something that let's say Europe shouldn't forget, of course. There is not only that relationship between the travel and all the trauma that is disconnected from these new communities born in Europe. That is also that if you don't know, and if you're not interested into research and to get in very deep connection with these, you started to be disconnecting with your own, or with that part of your identity. That's why I think it's so important. And yes, I think that connects very clear with what Professor Avtar Brah was talking about, the social and the psychological issue. This is the separation and the trauma created for that. And that is something that have been, we have been dealing with that, all the migrants, still we are. It's very important always to remember that we are connecting with that trauma of the separation. And the thing is that how this new subject born in these other countries, they don't want it to be. And there is a willing of not to be in contact, of not to be dealing unconnected with that trauma. So it's a rupture, it's a fracture about that. And what made me worry is about this is the kind of, they want to embrace the simplicity, leaving that trauma behind, trying to break the connection with the trauma. What they say is that that facilitate their life. So it's not only to break with the parent, it's not that kind of gap, it's even more deeper because you are trying to avoid that part of the experience that build that identity. I also wanted to address that, of course, this I was talking specifically about Spain, and because of my experience of 25 years, and of course I'm still connecting with that kind of research on the how the power is performed on these specific bodies. And I am very interested to know not only the dimension of that power and how if that power differentiate between migrant bodies and racialized bodies born in European country. Again, one of these terms that is very controversial is about racialization. Mention the racialized bodies, this is there's a tension there because that is a category given by the society. I'm not becoming a racialized body in Africa because I don't have to compare myself, but I became a racialized body in Spain, which is something that I think is very interesting to discuss, how the society need to point who is who, establish the subjects in any of this category. In the same way we could address to the gypsy communities. They became, despite of Spain is their country, they became racialized. Their body has been racialized for centuries. And that is something that is still happening in Spain, and it's not, there is no notice of that. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. I think that I have more questions that answer really. I've been talking a little bit about how I see the race, how research on race, and basically in this Spanish context where I've been working for so long. I would like to ask Professor Avtar Brah, yes, when you before, because that was something I wanted to ask you before, when you before talk about this process of signification, in the case of the British context, because I think that we could learn a lot about that. I think that your researches in the British context have been more deep and for longer than we have been doing in Spain. In the case of the process of signification of the subject, how experience can be embodied today. I mean, how the experience of the past can be counted today. Without, I mean, I'm talking about the communities born in British society today. For me, that is very important because, like I mentioned, in the case of Spain, there is a kind of willing rupture. They don't want to be connected with the past. They address themselves, and that is not something, I'm not saying that it's bad. They address themselves as Spanish, and they are because they're born there. But again, they don't want to carry with the trauma. They don't want to carry with the migration trip of their parents. They don't want to connect with that. They don't want that responsibility at the end. And also they feel like they don't need to.
you want me to respond to?
Yeah, that was a curiosity. I have to help me to continue with my research in Spain, because I know that you have been with you and all the academics in British study. They have been working a lot about this.
Yes, I think you said it yourself. I don't know if I'm connected, but the thing is that the people of black or brown or young people born in British, I mean, they were earlier in the 10-15 years ago, there were struggles about how to think about them, but I think by now there's a fair amount of consensus that we are British. And in that sense, it's a question of actually claiming the right to be British, but at the same time, different from, because the experiences are different from the centralized body, the white body, so which different from the white body, but at the same time, having the same claims to the society, not as outsiders. I think that has been a struggle, but I think it's kind of pretty much accepted now. People don't think about, British-born blacks, British-born brown young people as outsiders on the whole. Of course, there is racism, and racism thrives on constructing this difference. So I'm not saying that everybody in Britain thinks like that, but there is a growing consensus, that we too are indigenous peoples now in that sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we still have to go there. We still have a few more years of a struggle and to incorporate, not only because of the society itself, but also I think that our sons and our daughters born in Europe, they still need to understand that and do the work. I think that that is important and inevitable. They need to do the work. We need to do the work. And I hope we do it. I think that I was worried is because, yeah, in the case of Spain, there is a lot of things to do with their own communities that has been segregated for centuries and still are. So I say, okay, how come? How we gonna deal if we are the new arriving to this situation when the same society still have their own segregation, their own kind of apartheid inside, and they are not able to deal with that situation itself. So I think that is a lot of things to do, and yeah, we will need to do the work, definitely. Thank you. And I don't know if I have more time, more or less.
It is maybe we could, if I don't know if you have been able to make all the points that you wanted to make. If you have not, then the floor is yours. If you think that you have more or less, maybe it will be nice to have some time for discussion too.
Okay.
So as you wish, Caro.
Yes, so then, yes, for ending, I think that in the case of Europe, we, in this genealogy of the intersectionality, we need to incorporate indigenous other voices too. I mean, we need to incorporate more people. And I think, again, in the case of Spanish academia, we have this diversity outside Spain, people that, like Professor Avtar, that they talk with other voices from other point of view, but still we need that. We need to hear these other voices, and that is very necessary, because also about the genealogy, if we only have citations and we only looking for this kind of specific, and again, very white, very European or North American bibliography or genealogy in intersectionality, we do nothing. With this, we need something more like Donna Haraway was saying, more situated. And Spain has a very specific condition. Spain has a very specific problems in intersectionalities and things that Spain need to deal with. So we need these gypsy voices in this conversation. We need migrant voices in the conversation and be able to bring their own solutions and their own reflections. And we need to start incorporate those voices in our own research. We need to incorporate that in the citations because it's important to we have to do the reference, the classical ones. Of course we do. But the thing is that we need other voices too. And yes, we can continue talking until. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caro, for a very poignant presentation. I want to say to Professor Avtar Brah that I silenced you because there was some echo. So if you want to contribute to the discussion, please switch on your microphone again. It looks like the connection is.
Yeah.
Okay.
She may
come back.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, if you have any questions to Caro's points, please go ahead. Now is the time. I think we have some time for discussion before listening to Montse Rifà. So if not, I will begin. I have questions. No, Montse, you have. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Begoña. Thank you, Caro, for your lecture too. And I would like to ask you about this term on ethnicity. Is it related with this kind of resistance in the Spanish academy to introduce or include racial theory? I think that I have some colleagues from anthropology that they prefer to use the notion of racism and racialization because they consider that race is in itself racist. And I would like to discuss a little bit about this situation in the Spanish academy.
Thank you. Yes, there is a kind of I don't know how to call it, but you're right. It's a shame that the Spanish Academy haven't fully committed with the race and gender critical theory, right? Because it's really rich and it's really flexible, and I think it's not complicated to accommodate to any of the fields we work about it. I don't know why. I cannot tell you why. My questions to my colleague are always the same. Why you don't use that? Well, you know, talking about race is complicated and we don't want to be part of the problem. So they prefer to have this kind of neutral position in this instead of be bold. But that could be more or less okay. I mean, if you don't want to be part of the problem, if you accept or you want to or you prefer to take that. But the thing is that a part of that.
Parece que no tienes ninguna app llamada Finistad. Si quieres, pues.
Sorry, something. Okay. The thing is that the position you as a scholar also, if you decided to practice or to use whatever theory or whatever framework you decide to use, but at the same time you are not trying to incorporate these other voices, then there is a problem. Because maybe I can understand that maybe you are in the process of research of which theory, which framework accommodate to your field or your research or your point of view even. But the thing is that if today you are not incorporated these other voices to your research and to your syllabus, and then there is a huge problem. I think that the problem is there. I mean, I can understand the personal selection, but what I can understand is your situation as a scholar, because in the position that we are today, we need to. There is not other option. We cannot speak for everybody. That is impossible to do. We need to be able to incorporate these other voices, to bring people to reveal, like Professor Avtar Brah was mentioned, reveal these other voices and give them the space to do it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Karo Moret. I also I'm very thankful for your reflections, and I see that there is a question on the chat. Yeah. I can read it aloud. Is it possible that the concept of Hispanidad take the Spanish Academy to separate the migrants from Hispanoamerica from those from Africa?
Okay. Yeah, another controversial concept is Hispanidad, but I don't think so, because if I don't know, if we apply that categorization, the thing that I belong to that categorization, I should be Hispana. I was born in Cuba, so what I supposed to situate myself in the middle of Africa and Hispanoamerica. How I situate myself in this? Cuba is an ex-Spanish colony, but we are Black, and we deal with these tensions between identities, the African identity, and of course the colonial identity imposed by the Spanish people, the colonialism. So maybe in the Spanish territory, you could say that, but that only applied to the white Spanish migrant. So again, race has a lot to do with this situation. Despite of my language and my origin, the most of the time I'm not considered Hispanic in Spain. I'm just Black.
Okay, thank you. Karo, I have some questions too that at least two that I would like to address if you think it's okay. Yeah. The first one regards to this when I was listening to you, it was made very evident this reference to otherness. There is an otherness playing a big role here, no? Because again, I mean, otherness is constitutive of subjectivity. I mean, difference is constitutive of subjectivity. But the thing is, to what extent this kind of ontological concept of or experience or of otherness becomes a political key for power relationships, no? And then something that struck me while you were talking was this kind of overarching affective dimension built up in intersectionality related precisely to this political declination of otherness, no? When you spoke, for instance, about the fact that second generation migrants, if it's all right to use that name, no, do not want to have to deal with this trauma non-originarity, as it were, no? And to the point that those individuals become other to themselves, other to their own, no? So this is one thing that I wanted to discuss with you about, or to hear you talk a little bit more about. No, this overarching affective dimension built up in intersectionality by means of this political way of embodying otherness. No.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. In the case of the migrant body, this other body that arrive is already political. I mean, we have been targeted when we arrive. In the moment that your visa is gone and you are becoming illegal, you becoming a subject, and then we can apply to all these Foucaultian, right, concepts that he addressed about the punishment and about this other body that became in a kind of enemy or in the oddity to the state or to the society. You don't belong to the society, you are an illegal, so your target. And then in our imagination, we can see how police address to the Manteros in the case of Barcelona, for example. No, we can see all these images. No, that is a kind of revolt. It's a kind of chase. No, it's always running, chasing them, and always chasing specific bodies. And that never changed. We can see how all these white bodies, uniform white bodies that they represent the law, are chasing black bodies. And that is a very fixed image. That image never changed. That is already fixed there. So in the case of intersectionality, is the otherness is there specifically for race and ethnicity. And even we could say that beliefs, religion, if you practice, your religious practice is different of the society that you just arrive. If your color is different of the majority of the society when you arrive, if your origin is different, then you become in this otherness, you became in the periphery, right? You don't belong to the center. You arrive to the center, but you don't belong to the center. So your target, your mark. And society always is remembering you that. Society use their own people, or society use the law. But in any case, you became a target. You don't belong, and they are trying to remember you that. And in the case of the people born in the European society that has one of these differentiation, also society is remembered to them. That's why it's not strange that this controversial and this tension about abandoning the trauma. These new societies born in Europe, they don't want to carry, they don't want that heavy weight because they already have another kind of target, another kind of mark. That's why it's easier if you are a white migrant than if you are not. Because if you are a white migrant, if you are he was talking, one of the people that were talking about Hispanity. If you are a white Hispano, you have the language, you have the color, appropriate language, appropriate color. So that's going to be quite a huge difference between other people that maybe do not have the proper language, maybe do not have the proper color. So when we talk about intersectionalities, we talk about this access or these layers. You don't have to put it all together. You need to accommodate to each subject. So you have two migrant subjects, but they are completely different. So one is going to feel more the weight over him, over her. And that is completely clear. You only can walk the street. It's not complicated to see how a specific bodies became political, became in a problem for their society. And sometimes they don't need not even to talk. They don't need to not even to show an ID. I don't know if I answered your question properly.
Yes, yes, very clearly. I mean, what I hear you saying is that there are some subjects who are less other than others. And so, somehow, no?
Exactly.
Some are more other than others, and some are less other than others.
Yes, exactly. There is a spectrum in the oddity, right?
Of otherness.
Otherness, exactly. There is a kind of a spectrum. You can be close and you can be far, depend of your body, basically. And that is why it's quite normal, sad but normal, that some of the new communities born in Europe, they don't want to carry with the weight. That is enough, the way they are dealing, or they think is enough. The meaning or the signification of the abandon of the drama is not to carry with the drama, is to carry with dealing with the understanding and the meaning of that drama for them, because they don't experience that drama. Actually, there is something that is in the memory, still traumatic, that is in the memory, they remember. So but they don't want to. They prefer to abandon that because the weight is really heavy.
Yeah. I mean, they need to be less other. No, exactly. They are other, but they need to be less other.
Exactly.
And then the second thing I wanted to mention, and that would somehow link to the next presentation by Montse Rifà on class, is thinking again about migration. And the last book by Maria Ruto Zárate on intersectionality, where she speaks of the intersectional wound, no, la ferida interseccional, la herida interseccional, no, the intersectional wound. And there she, as someone who has been working on geography, speaks of space as a wound. But from the point of view of migration, this becomes very interesting from my point of view, because it is rather delocalization or spacelessness that becomes a wound, no? And exactly. And there we see, or at least I see, maybe I'm wrong, a class element playing there, no? Because if you are not spaceless, you don't usually, no, you have less chances to be obliged to move than if you are spaceless, no?
Yes.
So there is a class there. Migration, I think, because you said that you are working especially on race and gender, but I think that here race and class.
No, totally. No? Yes. There is one of the axes, because it's not the same. And again, with the same example we talked before, it's not the same to be a Black migrant rich, and then we can think in any football player, for example.
Any celebrity, yes.
Any celebrity, yeah. So it's not the same, but I say a football player because usually Black football players or Latino football players or whatever, they came and they are no more Black. There is a vanish of the race. There is a vanish. There is only about class. It's only about money, and then there is the reflection of. Avtar Brah, she mentioned about capitalism and the connection with that. That is the connection with the class, and definitely is there. It's not the same be a Black, rich migrant than, right? Because one, there is a huge difference here, and it's about the money, it's about the capital, it's about the possibilities and the privilege, and all of that connect with class, situate you in a different class, of course.
Yeah, maybe to the point that we would have to re-signify the category of migrant, no? Because it's I mean,
yeah, there is a huge difference between tourist and migrant.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
So we don't call migrant to any of these kind of celebrities or people, you know, because they have money. So
probably,
there is a kind of
probably we would call that tourist capital tourism or something like that, no? I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. There is a connection with the carelessness of money, the lack of money, and the concept of migrant. Exactly. Migrant people don't have money. Migrant people are poor. Migrant people have needs. That kind of things. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Karo Moret, we could just keep talking and talking and talking because it is, again, very rich and very interesting, and we thank you very much for your, openness and poignant perspective on this notion of race regarding intersectionality in order to give a future to this concept. And we hope that you, despite it is a very deep night in your end, that
it's
you
almost morning, 4 a.m.
Oh, wow. So we hope that you can keep a little bit with us now that we listen to Montse Rifà. Thank you very much, Karo Moret.
You're welcome.
Montse Rifà is a Sarah Hunter professor at the Faculty of Education Sciences at the UAB, where she teaches master's and undergraduate studies and directs doctoral investigations. She herself drives some research regarding the construction of identity and difference in the field of curricula and education, using visual methodologies and ethnography in migratory contexts. Her most influential research areas are the construction of identity and difference, geographies of childhood and migrations, and transnational spaces of education. And as I know from my own experience, she's also been leading very relevant institutions in this university and very relevant projects on gender in this institution. So, Montse, welcome. Thank you very much for accepting in extremis this invitation, and we are very, very much looking forward to listening to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Begoña. First, I feel a little bit nervous because I'm not a sociologist and I'm going to intersect intersectionality from social class. And as you said, I came from visual arts and I work in social science and education, just with the aim of dealing and analyzing inequalities through education with migratory context. And I want to thank Begoña and also Jana for this invitation. And I have decided to face this challenge by organizing my presentation based on 3 concepts. Okay, the first is evanescence, the second one is accumulation, and the third is assemblage, which is one of the concepts that Avtar Brah mentioned before. And I will develop these 3 concepts using the conceptual and the theoretical review, but also I would like to show 3 different short visual narratives that I will show just few minutes of video by sharing my screen. And I wish also to address these concepts from my own experience as feminist, academic, and activist, And I will try to connect with the previous lectures too. The selection of these three concepts is affected by the idea that they problematize intersectionality from the perspective of social class analysis and Marxism. Prior to this, I would like to share some notes on intersectionality and capitalism, following the intellectual that I am replacing here today, which is Ashley Borer, and this is her book on Marxism and intersectionality. And I would like to start with a quotation from a podcast that you can find on internet. And she said about capitalism, "My work is more interested in why do we have these implicit biases, right? Like what are the structures that cause bias and what kinds of large social transformations would be necessary in order to uproot these underlying systems from our social reality." And for me, that has to do with like the abolition of capitalism, the abolition of cops, the overcoming of private property, and the installation of like a feminist racial justice, in a sort of society, none of which were in any way doing at the current moment. And this is a quotation from this podcast. Here, Ashley was answering a question to the interviewers to clarify, because she's a skeptic about the usefulness of training cops in cultural diversity in the United States as a strategy for preventing social and cultural biases. Actually, what Borer maintains is that the role of the police is to enforce compliance and compulsion, obedience and coercion, and therefore it is not possible for this way to stop the brutality of their acts when they enter in a poor Black neighborhood. But let me start with the first of these three concepts I wish to explore. The first one is evanescence. 3 years ago, I was invited to participate in a seminar whose main topics were fabrications and accidents. And it was on that occasion that I began to question the relationship between Marxism, feminism, and intersectionality, to understand the appearance of protest through images. The common thread of that presentation was Women in Red in Protest, a work of which only the revision of fabrication as concept has been published, but not the critical analysis of the visual narrative of this protest. I'm working on it. It was at that moment that I began to investigate these three concepts, knowing that my focus is always on the construction of subjectivity and power relations, as Begoña has explained it before, both in education and visual culture. I approached then to the tension between materialism and evanescence to understand some of the issues related to capitalism and the analysis of capitalism and Marxism. And I start to study from Marshall Berman. He published a book in 1982 called All That It Is Solid Melts into Air, The Experience of Modernity. And he said the following thing about this idea of evanescence. He tried to discuss about the concept of evanescence. And he said, Marx does not dwell much on particular inventions and innovations in their own right. What stirs him is the active and generative process through which one thing leads to another. Dreams metamorphose in blueprints and fantasies into balance sheets. The wildest and the most extravagant ideas get acted on and acted out, and ignite and nourish new forms of life and actions. And in this book, Marshall Berman is trying to picture an idea that came from Adorno, who accused Marx about this fantasy of Marxism. And Adorno said that Marx wanted to turn the entire wall into a giant warehouse. And in this moment, Berman's opinion is that the Communist Manifesto expresses a double tension, a kind of double tension. the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and the conflict between the solid and the evanescent, which is constitutive of modern life. And the title of Berman is from the Communist Manifesto, this title related to all that is solid melts into earth. And according to Berman's thesis, it seems as if the most abstract forms of capitalism subsist. He refers to capital, wage, labor, commodities, exploitation, and surplus value, and instead, as if the human contents were subjected to a perpetual movement or transformation, where it is difficult to establish some permanent ties in this idea of the human as something abstract or blurred. And it's something that we address directly from feminism. Okay, we talk directly about this human condition. And precisely the human condition is the title of Hannah Arendt's book. This is a book from 1950s, and she started to dialogue, she started to reinterpret Marxism from feminism at that point. And she criticized the schematization of Marxist analysis, as well as the individualistic and nihilistic point of view. And she said, Hannah Arendt said that he did not develop a theory of political community. That's the idea that Hannah Arendt sympathizes with Marxism, but also she also criticized Marxism. And before to approach intersectionality from Marxism and the intersection of Marxism with other theories of view, such as feminism, post-structuralism, and post-colonial theories, I would like to start with Hannah Arendt, critics of Marxism, but also I would like to start with the link between Marx and Foucault. Both in the work of Marx as well as in Arendt and Foucault, there is a kind of dialectical historical movement. And in the case of Marx, he dignifies labor and reverses the role of the proletariat. Now the workers are considered the subjects of a social revolution. Arendt questioned the hierarchies and elevate political action back to the public sphere in terms of what does constitute the common in politics, in this public sphere. And finally, Foucault changed the repressive idea of power to analyze its productivity and to explore the dynamics of power-knowledge relations and subjectivities in specific periods. Then, in this context, I appeal to evanescence to dissolve the tension between labor and work, and between work and political action following Hannah Arendt, because they do not exist clear boundaries between life and work, between care and artifice, between intimacy and public, between women and men, and even between bodies and spaces in contemporary society. And I would like to share my screen now, because I bring here the concept of evanescence because one of the critiques that intersectionality has received is particularly addressed to the intercategorial complexity. Some critics are talking about the rigidity of this intercategorial complexity, and sometimes we misunderstand that there exists, we expect from a kind of magic formula to capture social phenomena. And I recently visited the exhibition Science Friction in CCCB, and there was a video installation there.
It says connecting.
By Dominique.
Hold on. Oh, I've got it. Okay.
Hello, Avtar, you're back.
Hello, I'm back. Sorry.
That's so good. We cannot see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. Sri, they can't see me, but they can hear me.
That's fine. Just stick with that.
Okay, all right. You switch it off now.
Or there's a camera. You'll get the little camera thing. You can put that on if you want.
Okay.
All right.
Again, welcome back.
Thank you. So sorry.
Don't worry. In that exhibition, there was a film essay by Dominic Koch entitled All Society. And in this film essay, you can watch a series of images that includes interviews with Scott Gilbert, Donna Haraway, and Maurizio Lazzarato. And I was fascinated by two specific quotations on that film. The first one was that the enemy is not the capital, it's not the economy, it is the immigrant. That's one of the quotations in that film. And the second one was that there are three civil wars: class, gender, and race. And I would like to just share 1.5 minutes of an interview to Dominic Koch, who is addressing this idea of intercategorial complexity and how to blur these separations between categories. I think that you can see now my screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to just play the video.
One part of the film is that syncing, or it promotes a kind of urgency to sync, not to think in categories or not to think in binaries, where it's either that, or like in this dualistic worldview that the Western culture applies often, and that leads us into some kind of dead end of conflicts finally. And so the work reflects, together with Donna Haraway, especially on that idea that we should bring different ideas from different fields together, and that are able to connect all the things together so that we can get a better understanding of the whole. The editing, as it is a process where you put different things together and where you create these interactions of the elements, is I try to not only reflect these questions with words or by theory or in the theory, but also physically in a way. So that's why I create these installations, video and sound installations. Especially the sound can open this up and make this bodily tangible in a sense, because you feel the vibration and you feel this idea that there's maybe something else that is sound. It's not visible, but you can really feel it.
Okay, then we can discuss about this film and exhibition, because it's based on the most recent books by Donna Haraway, Staying with Trouble, and we can connect the discussion with the situated knowledge approach if you want. The second concept is the concept of accumulation. Okay. One of the critical positions toward the analysis of social class is the subsidiarity or reduction of all of the other categories or operations to that analysis. But here I want to quote Borer again in an attempt to define capitalism that runs through us all as an economic system that uses violence to guarantee the accumulation of wealth for a small privileged group, this 10%, but also works by generating inequalities in the political, social, academic, intimate, educational, and imaginary fields. Borer considers that capitalism is a web of institutions, inherited histories, modes of access, strategies of confinement, and tactics of accumulation with different...
They can't see me.
Sorry. With different and varying configurations across history and across the world. In this sense, she says, I follow the analysis of Silvia Federici, who argues that capitalism has been evolved an accumulation of differences, inequalities, hierarchies, divisions, which have alienated workers from each other and even from themselves. Then, from a Foucaultian reading of Marxism, l'accumulation des hommes ne peut pas être séparée de l'accumulation du capital. That's a sentence from Negro. And at this crossroad, there is a reciprocity between the analysis of social modes of economic production and the production of subjectivity. Then this concept of primitive accumulation described by Marx and recovered by Federici is one of the issues that Fanella Giusti faces in her doctoral thesis. She's going to present and discuss her doctoral thesis next week. We supervised this thesis with Margot Pujal, and she addresses the ways of resisting and making agencies by women victims of rape in Costa Rica. To understand the subject of rape in Central America, following Segato, it was necessary to understand, as it occurs with gendered Orientalism, that indigenous women were seen as bodies and territories to be invaded by men, both colonizers and locals, and that imperialism works because these bodies are conceived as property. There is an alliance between colonialism and capitalism, which works by violating and subjecting women, poor and without education, but also young women today. A subjugation that in that thesis is contested by constructing a kind of space to collectivize their stories of resistance, to create networks of solidarity, care, and affects. Fraser and Jaggi in 2018 distinguished 4 stages or phases of capitalism from each accumulation regime that goes through them. That is a form of a stabilized institutional matrix in which the accumulation dynamics is shaped and modeled by a specific organization of their basic conditions. This includes different layers that span the political and the subjective, social organization and environmental resources. In the most recent period, there was a collision between the regime of liberal capitalism after the Second World War that gave way to capitalism managed by the state. And this new capitalism managed by the state, public policies became proactive in mitigating crises, investing in infrastructure, and assuming the cost of social reproduction, promoting permanent employment and consumption, and integrating unions into corporatist circle, and also compensating market failures. In the reading of capitalism from political theory, these authors consider that the dynamics of capital accumulation is oriented to benefits and not to needs. And this, together with private property and class stratification, the distinction between owners and workers, as well as the free market economy, constitute the main characteristics of capitalism. Currently, as you know, the objective of the capitalism is to ensure the conditions to continue sustaining the accumulation of private capital until its collapse gave way to the new regime of financial capitalism, built on the basis of transnational governance structures that empower capital to discipline citizens. At this point of the analysis, Fraser and Jaggi incorporate the interaction between regimes of economic production, cum social reproduction, socio-ecological regimes of accumulation, and regimes of racialized accumulation historically embedded in the specific relationship of appropriation and exploitation, generating forms of subjection, and so on and so forth. In this context, Fraser and Jaggi says the following: far from being simple given as matter of fact gender and racial difference are products of the power dynamics that assign individuals to structural positions in capitalist society. Gender division may be older than capitalism, but is assumed its modern male supremacist form only and through capitalism's separation of production from reproduction. And the analogous point holds for race. Although racial difference, as we understand it now, may have some affinities with earlier forms of color prejudice, it only took on its modern imperialist, white supremacist guise in and through capitalism separation of exploitation from expropriation. And they say that neither racial nor gender domination could exist in the current forms without capitalism. The second narrative that I wish to share is a digital narrative from World Press Photo. And it's a trailer from this digital collection that reconstructs the 7 days of protest in Minneapolis after George Floyd's death. And I would like to just to show this minute of the trailer of this project, because it tells about the accumulation of differences and how it works, this kind of accumulation of difference. And if you check the website of the Washington Post, you can see the complete project, and you can see the 147 videos that people upload and publish and share during these 7 days of protest in Minneapolis. But I'm going to show you just the trailer.
Montse, we are not seeing anything yet.
No, there is no sound here. Sorry.
But no, we have no image either.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. Just saying.
Okay, I try again. Okay, now it's working.
Yes.
You can see now? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I think, in my opinion, this is a good example of how bodies are, you know, just creating a revolution, but also how capitalism is constituting our bodies in terms of racism and also, you know, exclusion, social, economical exclusion, and gender too. Okay, and the last concept I want to develop is a concept that Avtar Brah mentioned it before, is the notion of assemblage. Even the main contributions of Marxist intellectuals criticizing intersectionality, the queer, feminist, and anti-racist Marxism, the intersectional critiques of Marxism, the different approaches within intersectionality, and so on and so forth. I wish to conclude my presentation by linking the analysis of accumulation of differences with what I call a feminist intersectional analysis of assemblage for social and educational research, aiming at understanding the plot of accumulations or the matrix of domination following callings Marxist basis of intersectionality is also prospective and reveals the proximity of dialectics with intersectionality, indeed in an activist sense. And here I would like to read the last quotation by Boyer. And she said here that the image of a matrix is a powerful and expansive one. It renders simultaneously the relations and provisional unity of multiple points within the figure without erasing the particularities of positions that constitute it. The matrix of domination thus signifies that for any given sociological context, that social locations are structured via a system of interlocking race, class, and gender oppressions. Thus, each site inside a matrix is relational, constituted in and through the other points within it. Moreover, the matrix shows the ways in which the dialectic of difference plays out simultaneously on multiple levels. And in this Boyer is directly based on Collins, and she says that she wrote a sentence by Collins that she says that these multiple levels are the levels of personal biography, the group of or community level, the systemic level of social institutions, and she concludes that Black feminist thought emphasized all three levels as sites of domination and as a potential sites of resistance. Despite, I'm finishing just two paragraphs. Despite of the distinction between exploitation and oppression, a multi-level and a multi-layered analysis is necessary to approach the ensembles of accumulations. I love the idea of a multi-axial performative conception of power as a Foucaultian and as a feminist and intersectional feminist academics. I think that it's a powerful concept, a powerful idea to analyze this matrix of domination or these ensembles of accumulations too. In line of what I said before, Fraser and Jeggi claims for a new approach in the analysis of capitalism, where we should place economy as part of social order, not as independent. In other words, seen as a result of social and economic practices and interrelated institutions. As they affirm, they are ensembles within ensembles, and disconnect with the idea of Angela Davis of a movement intersectionality, coinciding with King, which could allow us to observe mobilities, fluidity, permeability, and interaction of different systems of oppression and privilege that produce our bodies. In addition, we can also combine intersectionality with actor network theory by Bruno Latour's description of assemblage, to understand the assemblage of gender, racialization, and violence in neoliberal financial capitalism. In my research, according to Latour, I could not imagine a social science or research which is only worried in searching and providing explanations rather than looking for connections to understand the complex world in terms of power, knowledge, relations, and subjectivities. And following Latour, I consider our role as feminist researchers crucial for reassembling the social through collectivity. And this is the title of Bruno Latour's book. We must assume that the measured form of capitalist exploitation and then oppression is gendered racism. I think this is a sentence that Angela Davis posted in CCCB in Barcelona too. She said specifically that the major form of capitalist exploitation is racism and also Islamophobia. And from a feminist intersectional perspective, we must fight against this form of capitalist exploitation. It also means that we need to transform our research methodologies and to be less imperialistic, less ethnocentric, and less racist and classist and adultocentric in our research. And in my imagination, the subject of revolution, because this is one of the sentences that Marshall Berman posed in his book, who is this subject of the revolution. But the subject of the revolution in my imagination, both in the academia and social life and activism, are women researchers, Muslim mothers, and racialized girls. For instance, I work for empowering us then in conversation, like we did in our recent project called Transemigra. And I would like to show the last piece of video, which is a 3 minutes video with Muslim girls in Barcelona. And there is no translation in English, but you can understand well the context, just for the context and the girls, you know, faces and bodies. And I think that I think it's a good example of, you know, embodying the revolution from the research, but also from the motherhood and also from education and from youth. People in this idea that Avtar Brah called the Decolonial Solidarity agenda, no? From this intersectional and interdisciplinary perspective. And I would like to finish by sharing this narrative. Okay.
¿Y qué más habéis hecho aparte de ir a rezar? Pues nada, comenzamos para ir. Vamos, explica tu vida. ¿Qué has hecho todo el día? Rizar el pelo, maquillarse,
Hablar conmigo desde la tarde.
tienes que decirle el orden. Lo primero que has hecho a las 12 es maquillarte. Bañarme, después de bañarte de la ropa, después de eso, después de eso, y los hemos rizado el pelo, después de eso, se metió otra vez la aplicación
Del TikTok.
después de venir a Sara, después de media.
Era mucho el Rubius. 1,50. Vale. Quiero comprar.
Pues con tu dinero puedes comprártelo o no, Fátima. Eso. ¿Y cuánto dinero tienes?
Es una TikToker famosa. Es la de Guido. Ese es el name de Alexi. Es súper guapo, también es un TikToker famoso. Esta es la que hace tradiciones, es muy famosa esta tía también. Tío, me quiero comprar el libro.
¿Y cuánto cuesta?
El name de Alexi.
¿Pero cuánto dinero tienes tú? Entonces te puedes comprar eso.
¿Qué?
¿Te puedes comprar eso? Esto blandito.
Pero ¿cuándo dinero me va a sobrar?
50 céntimos. ¿No? Si tú tienes 2 euros y eso vale unos 50, te sobrarán 50 céntimos.
¡Ay, Roblox!
¿No quieres?
Roblox. Pero yo me compraría Rubius.
¿Qué es esto de Roblox? ¿Es un juego?
Roblox es un juego, yo me lo he hecho. Eres una famosa. Adivina quién lo ha hecho.
¿Esto qué es?
¿Qué es este? Lo han hecho los... Mira, Joder, tío, me quiero combinar con...
Okay, just to clarify the context of this piece, we produced it during the last 4 years, 57 videographic pieces with several groups of Pakistani, Moroccan, and Guinean girls, and we tried to to understand how educational spaces are outside the school, outside the institutionalized education, to fight again one thing that Avtar Brah describes so well in the cartographies of diaspora, that is the indirect racism. That means that sometimes in the school, the educators are guiding these girls in just creating lower expectations about their futures. And we try also to fight against the idea that families are also educating at home and also supporting girls to study at the school. And we try to produce knowledge about this kind of spaces that normally are invisible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Montse. It's hard for me to say your family name too, because to me you are Montse, so I know. So yes, thank you very much. Very also multi-layered presentation to touch upon this element of class as an axe or vector of differentiation or inequality. I don't know if any of you, including Avtar Brah, have any wishes to comment or ask or contribute in any way to Montse Rifà's presentation. I have some, if you allow me just to begin. Also as a kind of summarization of this path that we've gone through since we began until now, no? I have the feeling that we have somehow stumbled into this need of re-signifying some of those axes of differentiation or of inequality. With race, we saw that race splits as a significant into, according to what Karo Moret told us, no? Into, on the one hand, ethnicity, on the other hand, migration. And we saw already that migration is a significant that also might split, no? When it connects to some class aspects in the context of nowadays capitalism. We didn't touch very much upon gender, but from your contributions, I think that we also must assert the need of re-signifying gender, because the subject we point at when we think of gender is not longer only women. Avtar Brah mentioned that explicitly. There are others of man who are embedded in this and receive the impact of this gender inequality acts or differentiation acts, such as trans, LGBT, queer, etc. And now comes the question. Let's see if Montse will agree, and the rest of you, of course. It's an open question. I have the impression that we also need, and somehow it is implicit in what you said, Montse, that we are also faced from an intersectional perspective with the need of re-signifying the class acts of differentiation, because we no longer can point to the proletariat as the subject of class inequality. Now, people, instead of talking about proletariat, they talk about precariat. This has been one of the big moves, no?
Yeah.
But also from the point of view of, for instance, Mackenzie work, who in his The End of Capital advocates for the end of capital, in the sense that for instance, rich are not necessarily those who own the means of production anymore. This doesn't mean that the distinction between rich and poor is not applying. It applies, of course, but we cannot identify anymore who the rich are. Or at least it's not that easy always, no? Because, I don't know, the production of digital data, no? Makes clear that capital is inaccessible. Capital circulates in circuits that are not visible anymore as they were once, no? So what do we do with that? What do we do with this digital, virtual, invisible, yet material, because it has an impact on subjects and on lives, class elements, no? I say that because in some of the, I saw a kind of Deleuzian thread going through your presentation, also in the visual materials that you used, maybe not in the last one, but the two first for sure, no? And it is clear that for Deleuze there are two levels in reality, the molecular one and the molar one, no? And it seems that with classical capitalism we are touching on the molar level. With the end of capital, Mackenzie work, we are touching on the molecular, but we cannot escape anyway class differentiation or class inequality. This puzzles me, no? How do we deal with this multi-layered capitalism, so multi-layered that sometimes we can't even identify the subject of capital, the mechanisms of capital, the circuits of capital, etc. So how to keep still on, pointing at class as an act of differentiation when this indifferentiation is also at stake, no? Sorry, it was a long and complicated, maybe not too clear reflection, but thank you for taking care of it.
Thank you, Begonia. I think that the question is clear, but I'm not sure that I could answer it. I will try to do my best. I think that it remembers me the first definitions of intersectionality by Crenshaw, that she considered the three levels, the level of the political and the structural and the symbolic. And I think that when we address this idea of multi-level, multi-layered analysis, multi-axial, performative conception of power, we are just recovering this idea that all is working together. I'm not a sociologist. What I learned from social class analysis is that we must criticize capitalism. We must understand how this financial capitalism has changed. That's the reason because I showed the first video, because Maurizio Laterato, this is an Italian philosopher that reflects on immaterial work, but we can also understand about the idea of fluidity in this financial capitalism. We need to understand how it works, and because if you want, just following Saskia Sassen, who is a feminist economist, she's just studying the ways of expulsion based on the alliance between capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. And I think that you can analyze these expulsions, this idea of dispossession that affects us as women and as workers, just trying to understand how this speculation works. And I like the idea of exploring and addressing vulnerabilities, just following the definition of vulnerability by Judith Butler, because when she describes vulnerability, she's talking about the idea of feeling vulnerable because the system, the capitalist system, is pushing me, is pressing me, is obliging me to work for few. It's just obliging me to bring my son or daughter to a public school, which is less, we have less resources than the private one or whatever. But she also thinks that vulnerabilities, or the idea of vulnerability, has in itself the power of agency, the power to transform from these vulnerabilities or wall and to resignify or place in this world. And I don't have a receipt, but I think that we should address all of this problem in this entangled way, following the quantic metaphor of Karen Barat, just addressing this idea that all of these systems are entangled and these are pushing us and these are producing us as subjects. But in our vulnerable condition, we can resist and we can react and we can resignify these places.
Thank you, Montse. Caro, go ahead if you want to.
Yes. No, as a continue of what Montse was saying, thank you, Montse, for the talk. Really, really good. I'm also work on visual art, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. But for me, when I see your pieces, your recordings, just came to my mind was more about the access. Who has access to what kind of work and the division of work also. And this division, this fragmentation between molar and molecular is a specific part of the society, is in the society to do the service. So they work with hand, they service, they are for and in service of the other part of the society that work in this level that we are not seeing this kind of work anymore. And we are here, we can talk about this online work, this kind of, but for that you need preparation, for that you need to be part of the society, to be prepared, to be educated. And that is very clear in the second piece, in the collections of video for the George Floyd. Why is that video revolutionary? Because in some point we're talking about this is a cross, and this is also about what Black Lives Matter, what is so important, because there is a cross of boundaries there, how these communities that usually are in service of the societies, that are part of this kind of manual work, that they are not, why these more poor neighborhood and more poor society are able to use the tool made and by this other part of the societies. What is the revolution then that we started to see with the eyes of this neighborhood what is happening? So there is a kind of contra-narrative between what society show about these communities and when these communities just use the same tool to inform and to show themselves to the society. That is completely revolutionary. That is when all the videos started to appear inside Ferguson, inside all these neighborhoods, and they started to show and reveal what was really the behavior of the white police. Then everything started to change. That was the convulsion. That was the revolution. Yeah, I just wanted to point that.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you are saying, because I think that this micro narrative embedded in this global digital world are contesting the master narrative of the states and the master narrative of the media, and then we are producing this narrative to create other realities. But for the first part of your question, I think that the problem with capitalism, and if you want, how this regime of accumulation are affecting us as racialized poor women and so on and so forth. For me, the issue is not only an issue of access. I will try to explain about that. I will try to talk a little bit about that. When Hannah Arendt wrote on totalitarianism, he wrote that one of the main characteristics of totalitarianisms in Europe were the lack of mobility. And that's, for me, that's crucial, because when we are analyzing global international migratory process, we must analyze the lack or the possibility for moving, for crossing, for arriving, for being at Europe or at any part of the world. And when we try to understand the Muslim girls' life, the Pakistani and Moroccan girls' life, we just move with them through the public space, and we try to understand the the opportunities for moving that they have, both in the educational system, in the social area, but also in the public space. And for me, that's crucial, because I work on migration studies, and we not only work on access, but we also try to analyze mobilities and these opportunities to move, or this lack of mobility that what this Hannah Arendt considered that constitute fascist, states or fascist governments, and that's, I think that's beautiful in the video of Floyd. Map, because you are just crossing the street. They are moving. They are recreating this cartography by videos, by placing these videos in the street, and they are just making more visible that protest is movement and feminist is also movement. And I think that movement is important, as Angela Davis said, that we should talk about this movement intersectionality.
I would like to say something to that, just to show, I think, what to me is one of the main challenges for intersectionality as a critical tool. Because we were just now discussing, yes, mobility, the right to mobility is very important, but on the other hand, when we are forced to move? And that would be the other side of the same coin, no? Sometimes you are not free to move; you're just forced to move, yeah. And mobility becomes there an act of inequality, no? Yeah. So I think this is a challenge in general for intersectionality. That like Avtar Brah was saying, no, it's important to find the context, because in the same context, we can find subjects for whom mobility is a right, mm-hmm. and others from whom it is a curse. It's a curse. No? So, yeah. And then in relation to that, I wanted to comment on a concept that a French philosopher, Chantal Jacquet, has coined some years ago. It's the trans class. The trans class, precisely adding something to this discussion on accessibility, and equality of opportunities, or meritocracy. she criticizes hardly what she understands an essentialization of class in terms of meritocracy, no? In the context of late capitalism. And instead of that, I mean, in order to counteract this, she has suggested and developed this notion of les trans class, the trans class, no? And I find that very, very interesting, again, as an effort to make categories move, no? And indeed, in this sense, literally, I mean, to find the critical power of categories in this in-betweenness, as it were, no? Where they don't allow themselves to be fixed, no? And in this inflexibility that you were talking about, Montse, but to allow, even to encourage categories to move, no? Precisely, for instance, to be able to criticize capitalism and the capitalist order of inequality, no? So I don't know if you knew this category. I discovered it recently, only half a year ago or something, and it's you know, it's intriguing me still. Did you know that category, Avtar?
I didn't know it. I didn't know of this category at all.
I don't know if the book by Chantal Jacquet is translated into English. I don't know that.
I don't know either, but I'd love to read it. Yes.
I'll send you the information.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Also, I've been quiet because so sadly I missed half of the last presentation because of technical problems at my end. I'm so sorry. It sounds fascinating.
But please, could you share with us your opinion on the importance of class in intersectional analysis?
Oh, I see class as very, very important, actually. It's essential. It's an essential category alongside other categories like gender, racism, and sexuality, in the sense of, you know, people who have been sexualized in particular kinds of ways. And I think class remains, so long as we have capitalism in the world, class will be a very, very important category. And we need to think about, as you were saying earlier on, we need to think about how it actually operates on the ground in new ways today. And we have to sort of develop new strategies to deal with these new manifestations of it. So I think that's the whole kind of thing. I think that's the project that we have to have. How is class manifested in new ways, and who are being targeted as the subordinate group, and who are being produced as the dominant group in these new contexts? I think we need to do that.
Well, we got homework from you, Avtar.
We all have. I have too. We have all got homework to do. Yes, we do. I wanted to also ask: are we going to present these talks in some form of publication or something? I was just wanting to hear more of the bits I missed from you. I wanted to hear that, you know.
But don't worry, because this is being recorded.
Oh, lovely! That's wonderful.
And Jana, who is our YouTube artist, she will be bringing that up to a YouTube channel that we have.
Yeah.
So we will send the link to you, so you would be able to have a look at it again and rewatch it.
Okay. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I was so disappointed at having missed half of the last presentation. Yes.
We were very disappointed that we could not have you among us.
I know, it was sad, but anyway, I'm back here.
It's good you came back. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if anyone still feels the need or the will to share some comments or adding some kind of closing remarks or opening remarks. and well, if not, I would just want to really say thank you once more to all of you. It's been really a privilege to have this opportunity to share, and we indeed end up with the feeling that there's still a lot to do, and we will try to keep on working. Thank you for your inspiring presentations, for sharing with us your newest research, and yes, let's hope we'll meet again somehow soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.